Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Last week's abduction of Libya's Prime Minister by rebels may have signified who holds the upper hand. So is Libya being ruled by the gun, and who's really in control? Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, we love to check back in on the Arab Spring from time to time, just to see how various countries are doing.
Right.
As far as Libya is concerned, 2 years since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, what is our online community saying?
Well, I'll tell you, online the sentiment is dismal. There's a sense of pessimism.
Right.
This tweet here from Najla pretty much sums it up. She says, Libya is a state that's gone from oppression to oppression, colonialism, Gaddafi, and now, sadly, a second wave of imperialism. Well, that's the view from one person. Of course, we want to hear from you at home. So tweet us your questions and your comments throughout the conversation with hashtag AJStream.
And while you're tweeting us, why not follow the stream on Twitter while you're there? See the stories making news around the world and check out some of our exclusive web content. You can pitch us a story idea and it could end up as a future program. I'm very serious about this. This is exactly what happened with our India Open editorial last week. You suggested story ideas, and we're going to do 2 of them this week on Wednesday and Thursday. So keep pitching your ideas. We really use them.
Hi, my name is Khalid Abdullah. I'm an actor and an activist, and I'm in the stream.
The temporary kidnapping of Libya's Prime Minister Zeidan by armed men has highlighted the country's political power struggle. A weak government, tribal and rebel factions vying for power and economic issues have Libyans bracing for a further slide into lawlessness. In the east, fighters, activists and striking workers have blocked oil terminals and are demanding a bigger share of the revenues. Large stockpiles of weapons from the uprising are spreading across the country, with security hard to come by. To make matters even worse and more tense, Libya is still without a new constitution. So 2 years after the revolution ended Muammar Gaddafi's 42-year rule, who controls Libya and how's the country really fared? With us to talk about this via Skype from Tripoli is Abdelmonem Al-Yaser. He's chairman for the National Security Committee. In our Google Plus Hangout, we have Mohamed ElJarh, a blogger of foreign policy who often travels to Libya on assignment. Ayat Mneina is the founder of ShababLibya. That's the Libyan youth movement which set out to cover the events of Libya's revolution. And with us via phone from East Libya is Jaballa Hasan. He is director of the Cyrenaica Media Centre, which serves as the voice for the Barca youth movement. And that is the organisation that has taken control of the oil terminals in that part of the country. So it's great to have you all in the stream. Now, let's start with this temporary abduction of Libya's Prime Minister. Abdelmonem, you're chairman of the National Security Committee. How is it possible for your Prime Minister to be abducted even for a minute?
It's quite possible under the situation we're in. Basically, if anybody would like to know where the Prime Minister is, you can walk into the Corinthia Hotel, where anybody is actually just about anybody could book a room and stay there. That's where he stays. And he travels with very little guards and has no detail around him. Pretty much it's this is the situation that emerged after the liberation, after the end of the armed revolution.
Okay.
The government has not really established any protective detail or the protective guard around the GNC or the government.
All right.
I am the National Security Committee chairman, and I have no guards around me either.
Malika?
Well, the kidnapping and then shortly after release of the Prime Minister, as you mentioned, is something that online has caught a lot of attention. Zeidan says this marks a total failure of what he says is the project, and I assume that he's referring to the revolution. Look at the armed militias and the kidnapping of the Prime Minister. It speaks a lot. Jaballa, there's also a tweet here from Nafia who says this shows a heavy cloud of anarchy hanging over Libya. Its outcome will determine the future of that troubled nation. Anarchy, is that going too far? Jaballa?
Yes, well, thank you. I believe this is disgrace, so to speak. I mean, this is a prime minister. If he doesn't have a bodyguard, I mean, what do you expect? To me, the government, they call it the legitimate government. Legitimacy to us is honesty, transparency, and check and balance. None of those concepts, none of those God's concepts exist in this government. So there is no legitimacy but chaos and systematic chaos and total turmoil in Tripoli.
So, Abdelmonem, are you telling me that into the hotel walked some rebels and then just took your prime minister? I just want to make sure that we're understanding this correctly.
Yeah, you have to. It's very difficult for anybody who is not here in Libya.
Yes, exactly.
Actually, to understand the situation as is. You have to understand that we are in a transitional period from the end of an armed revolution to a state building. Unfortunately, this transition is not going as ideal as we wish. There's a lot of armed revolutionaries who still point themselves as the guardsmen of the revolution. And
can I just at one point?
Sorry, please let me finish, please. And basically, all of these guys are being paid by the prime minister, and they are appointed by the prime minister and the GNC. I don't necessarily agree with that, but this is the situation. We emerged to a situation where the government has not seriously started building the army and the police. I'm an opponent to this stuff. I have advocated from the beginning that starting from the end of the armed revolution, is that we should have started on disarmament, demobilization, reintegration of armed militias.
Okay, let me bring in Mohamed into
else has done, DDR.
Abdelmonem, let me bring in Mohamed into the conversation because I want to share it. We have to share it between four of us, and I want different perspectives here as well. Mohamed, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, it's like there was a good question. Who's really ruling Libya? Is it the GNC? Is it the prime minister and his government? Is it the militias? Is it the people who's running Libya? And I think I've seen the most accurate answer to date few days ago. Libya is ruled by everyone and no one at the same time. That's basically what's happening. GNC is blaming the government for the failure. The government is saying the GNC is holding it back, but to me, the failure of the government is a reflection of the failure of the GNC. You cannot separate the two. The government is a product of GNC. If the product is a failure, then the source of that product is a failure.
I feel you nodding. Jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's not entirely surprising that the kidnapping of the Prime Minister took place. If we remember back to a few months ago, actually earlier on this year, when the GNC was stormed for days until the political isolation law was passed by force. So the use of force and militias is not foreign to our country, unfortunately, and for people in the government or the GNC to criticize what happened to the Prime Minister, they only need to think back to what happened with the political isolation law to remember that they really can't say anything. The Prime Minister could not have stopped it, as Abdelmonem was just saying. So it's not surprising what's happening. It's unfortunate, and it is almost everyone's responsibility to make sure that we move forward and begin to secure the country.
Well, Ayat, you just said that it's not surprising what's happening. We're also hearing from Libyans online who want to give our international viewers just a little taste of what the state of living in Libya is like today. I'd like all of our guests to have a listen to this video comment.
And we feel like we live in a lawlessness country, and no one can help you if you have any problem with one of these militias. But at the same time, we're still dreaming tomorrow the conditions in Libya will be better, and the government will be stronger than the militias. And we hope Libya someday will be a democratic country.
So Jaballa, you heard our guest there say that he feels like he's living in a lawless country. Militias, as he says, are on the streets and no one can help them. So other people have thoughts on what this means. Omar says this sounds like the exact definition of a failed state. Another person writes in saying that Libya is going to be a failed state if the rebels don't surrender their arms. Are these the ingredients for a failed state? What's going on?
It seems like it. I think we are heading to that direction. What I'm saying is there is a huge mistrust or distrust between GNC and the government. There is no clear communication between those two bodies. Well, this is the bottom of the whole problem. There is no trust even from the top and the down. I mean, the people, especially in Cyrenaica state, they don't trust the government because the government is totally corrupt. It's totally corrupt. It's totally disconnected with the layman. Which this is very important. If you want to run the government, if you want to run a country, you have to listen to the people. You got to be a good listener. The government doesn't listen to nobody, but actually involved in total corruption and total mockery. I mean, that's the feeling of the Cyrenaica state, or that's the feeling of Cyrenaican people. Cyrenaican people, they lost the trust of the government. If there is no trust, there is no hope. Actually, what all those guests, it seems we all agree we are in a total chaos.
Abdelmonem, respond to Jaballa. He's in the eastern part of Libya, and he's saying that Libyans there, they're not trusting what the government in Tripoli is doing.
No, that conversation about east, west, and south is really not very constructive, because the issue about the government and GNC and dysfunctionality, it has to do with all of Libya. Mr. Dr. Jaballa may not know is that the majority of the supporters, the people who are preventing the removal of this prime minister, who is a failed prime minister, in my view, are from the east, and mixed, also west, south, you know, all there. He has a block of supporters. It's got nothing to do with east and west and south. It's really all of Libya is suffering from the situation that we're in. It is suffering from a dysfunctional government and incapable prime minister, in my view, to understand the priorities of how to transition Libya from this state of armed militias and spread of weapons to a normal state. So it has nothing to do with east, west, and south and all that kind of discussion.
Well, I think we do. If you really look at it deeply, we have the three separate states. We have Tripoli state, we have Cyrenaica state, we have Hassan in the south. This is a history. This is the geography and history of Libya. The eastern province of Cyrenaica state
is just the geography.
So let me
the direction. It is Libya has moved away from that direction. Libya is an integrated state, and anybody who does not understand that should come to the GNC and see how the members of the GNC from the different parts of Libya interact. They actually work together in different blocks, regardless of where they come from.
Okay, so there's harmony apparently.
I don't want to involve in dialogue.
Jaballa and
because actually what happened is, you guys don't demonstrate any honesty or any transparency to communicate with you, or to have a constructive dialogue to
Dr.
begin
Jaballa,
with.
when have you ever communicated with me and you didn't find any transparency? That's not correct. That's not true. To make these accusations are not true. You're accusing all of the members of the GNC to be not transparent.
Okay, gentlemen, Abdelmonem, Jaballa, I am asking you to hold tight on this part of the conversation, because we're going to end up having the entire conversation just on this one point about transparency. You're not telling the truth, geographical issues. I want to move things on a little bit. Now, you may have heard the acronym GNC. That's General National Congress. That is part of the transitional process in Libya post-revolution into actually getting a very solid long-term administration. Ayat, I know you wanted to jump in. Help us move a little bit forward in the conversation.
I just wanted to point out some of the comments that were made about the government lacking transparency, and then ultimately concluding that it's completely corrupt. I wanted to pose the question to the guests. The Prime Minister came out and spoke and expressed concern regarding some factions within the government, within the GNC, that are basically making the government's job more difficult and pointing to that as a large problem. So what do you say to these components that are actually should be behaving as though they are part of the government, but are obviously acting differently or acting as a different arm and trying to oppose? This is with regard to the Prime Minister's claims.
Abdelmonem?
I will. Sorry.
Yeah, Mohamed, go ahead.
I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
To answer Ayat's question, and also to comment on the video, the snapshot that you had from one citizen from Libya. That we have to remember that this revolution happened because the people walked out on the streets. It happened because it was the voice of the people, and it succeeded because of the voice of the people. But when we had the government, when we had the GNC, the voice of the masses, the majority, has been sort of ignored, and we only hear about the voices of the minority, the loud minorities who have the guns.
So now, Mohamed, what are the voices of the masses saying? What is that voice saying?
The voices of the masses in Libya is to put political differences aside for now. We don't want Islamist agenda or liberal agenda or anything. We need to build institutions that will serve any country, be it an Islamist country or a liberal country or a secular country. It doesn't matter. These differences, this war or this fight, this struggle should not happen now. This is the voice of the people, is that we should build a country first, institutions where we can actually fight over or struggle politically, fight over. But at the moment, it's like there are different groups in Libya. They're fighting over something that does not exist yet. It's so pointless. This is how I see it, and I think many people are so frustrated because of this.
Let me bring back in, Mohamed, that's a great point. Let me bring back in the community.
Well, Mohamed, you mentioned some of that frustration. We're seeing a tweet here from Libyans, and this one says, the government now is transitional. Also, its perimeters are temporary. It can't really move on until it completes its mandate. But then on the other hand, Ayat, this person follows up saying, the point isn't to get out of this transitional phase. The point is to complete it. We don't want a premature stage afterwards. So how do we get out of this transitional phase, as they put it, without moving too fast, too far?
This is for me, right?
It was for Ayat, but please go ahead.
Yeah, this is, to me, this is kind of an irony to me. I mean, all of us, all of your guests, ladies, they are agree we are in a deep problems, but the problem is we become part of the problems. We don't become part of the solution, like this guy who belongs to GNC. What I'm saying is we have to come up with a solution. We do have the problem. We do have a deep problems, whether GNC or the government, because there is no trust. The people, they don't trust this government no more. This government, to them, to us, it's a bunch of corrupts. Put it this way. This is the truth. We all agree, even all those guests I'm listening tonight, we all agree we have a problems. Even the guy who belongs to the government or belongs to GNC. I mean, the whole question should be how we solve the problem, how to get out of this systematic chaos, how to come out of this turmoil.
Okay, Jaballa, thank you. You wanted to reframe the question slightly. Abdelmonem, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is a good question that Dr. Jaballa is putting forward. Basically, I have put a proposal, a roadmap, proposal for a roadmap for Libya, and it's as follows. Basically, we have tried the GNC, and everybody have to understand there is a history behind everything. The GNC is based on the Constitutional Declaration. Unfortunately, the people who drafted the Constitutional Declaration thought that this transitional period would go very easy, and Libyans are very much in agreement about what they want. They did not know that there are minorities. What I mean by minorities, I mean by small groups, there are small populations, 15, 20, whatever percent, that have drastically different views from the mainstream, which is about 65%.
Abdelmonem, let me ask you something very directly, though. It's only been 2 years since the revolution began, and since Muammar Gaddafi was removed. Can you tell, is life better in Libya now, or is it worse?
I don't want to answer this question because it would be misleading.
Well, why is it misleading?
You know what? You cannot do that because nothing more horrible than living under a totalitarian state with no hope of having a better life. But now there is hope. There is a struggle to get out of the transitional period, but there is hope to have a free country.
Okay, we're fast ending it. We're getting to the very end of the show here before we go to the post show. So let me share this back with Malik in the community.
Well, he just mentioned hope, and I see that same thread online. Ahmed says it's not easy to compare 42 years with just 2 years by asking who really controls Libya now. And Ayat, there's also a tweet from Nada who says, I think it's just too soon to tell, considering the state Libya was in after the dictatorship. We haven't even finished healing yet. Ayat, is there still a sense that Libya is still in healing?
I definitely think that reflects a sentiment that most Libyans share, and they're not asking for a government comparable to something in the West overnight. Libyans are willing to hold on for the long term, but they need to see improvements, milestones along the way. They would like to see security. They don't want to see electricity cutouts. They want to see rule of law play a huge role in their country. So if the government starts producing these milestones, you will see that the population will support it. And that's what needs to be done in this phase right now.
So Mohamed, Abdelmonem said that it was very unfair of me to ask about the comparisons between when Muammar Gaddafi was ruling Libya and now. If I asked you that same question, or perhaps tweak it a little bit and just ask how successful has this revolution been, what would you say?
I would go with the sentiment that obviously this might be the wrong question to be asking now. The question that we should possibly be asking is, how long does it take to heal or to move beyond the legacy of 42 years of dictatorship? That's the question that we should be asking. Does it take 2 years, or does it take another 40 years? Now, that's where the debate should start. It's not about better or not better.
When you ask that question, what do you answer it for yourself, Mohamed?
It's very hard to give a direct answer to that, but we have history. We have history that we can go back to. We have actually scientific studies of looking at countries that have been through conflict and how they've emerged. Some of them didn't emerge. There are studies that show what the possibilities of a country emerging is. Now, I just want to add one thing. There are some very active and very patriotic GNC members that I see on Twitter or I see on Facebook, and they're offering lots of initiatives and putting them forward. Menem is one of them, actually. But do you know what the problem is? We have so many officials who are coming up with their own initiatives and ideas that are great. But do you know what the problem is? They're not working with each other.
Right. It's really interesting being able to check in to see how Libya is doing, and there's so many different perspectives here. We are not over with this conversation. We are taking it to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. You will hear more from Abdelmonem, more from Jaballa, more from Mohamed, and more from Ayat. Of course, the community as well. Can you sum up this part of the conversation as far as the community is concerned? What are they seeing? What are they hearing?
Well, definitely. I think we started off with a little bit of pessimism and reached a point where there was some hope. And this tweet from Mohamed, I think, is a good one to leave us on. He says, we went through 42 years. We can get through whatever is next.
Interesting. So we will take our guests to the post show, but let me tell you what we're doing tomorrow. On the next show, accusations of racism and oppression in South Africa. But this time, they're coming from white South Africans. We'll discuss the claims of a group called Red October and how South Africa is reacting to them. But right now, stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. We'll be talking about Libya post-revolution to see how it's doing. We will see you online. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Streams Post Show. We're still discussing how Libya has fared since the end of Gaddafi's rule. With us to help us do that is Abdelmonem Al-Yaser, Chairman of Libya's National Security Committee, Jaballa Hasan with the Cyrenaica Media Centre, and we also have Ayat Mneina, founder of ShababLibya. Jaballa, we lost you on the telephone just when I wanted to ask you a question. You were pointing out all of the problems that Libya has, the challenges, and a lot of your focus was really on the GNC and the transparency of the government. But really, you are the spokesperson for Barca, and Barca has taken control of the oil production in the eastern part of Libya. So aren't you part of the problem too? Jaballa?
Yeah, we are part of the problem actually. Yes, I hear you. I think what's happening right now, the way we see it in Cyrenaica state, or the people live in Cyrenaica, what happened is they are perpetuating what happened during the Gaddafi era, the 25 years of oppression and repression and marginalization of the Cyrenaica state. This is exactly what happened right now. And the people in Cyrenaica state, they try to emancipate themselves from this oppression. That's the way I see it. I arrived from the United States and the end of August, and I can see the difference, and I can see the despair. I can see the frustration. You can see it. I can read one word. I can see all this body movement and these body gestures in the Cyrenaica people's face.
So Jaballa, how does it help by one group seizing oil production? So Jaballa, how does it help if one group, the group that you're spokesman for, seizes oil production? How does that help the challenges that Libya has right now? Jaballa, are you still with us? Yes. How does it help if one group...
I didn't hear you.
Yes. How does it help if one group, your group that you're the spokesperson for, seizes control of oil production, at the same time you're criticising the government and what they're not doing, and yet you are one of the groups that are taking control into your own hands? I'm still not hearing an explanation for that. Jaballa?
I cannot hear you, but I can.
All right, Jaballa, we're going to sort out the audio because we can't have the conversation without you hearing us. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Malika.
Well, you know, during the main show, we raised a lot of the challenges that are facing Libya right now. And one of them that we touched upon but didn't really delve too deeply into was the issue of arms and rebels being armed. Taha on Twitter says, first and foremost, Libya needs to disarm and disband the militias, as he calls them, get a robust armed forces for law in order to return. Another person says, I think what needs to be done is the dissolvement of any armed group and form a Libyan armed forces. So Abdelmonem, you mentioned this earlier, that this is an issue. What is the government and what can anyone go about getting rid of all of those arms?
I have put a proposal forward to do that, and you have to understand that the situation was not taken care of immediately, and I'm not sure why, because a lot of people in the government misunderstood what it means to be to have revolutionary militias around. They misunderstood the transitional period and did not really think that we really need to do that. So they've complicated the situation. They complicated it to the point where now there's regional militias, basically city militias. Some are actually ideological militias and some political militias, and they're all basically they are contesting with each other. And right now there has to be a government that will instill confidence on behalf of the people in order to disband militias and surrender weapons. The problem is that the lack of trust in this government is contributing to the barrier to disarmament, and also the call to disarmament. It's an issue. What every country like Libya, you know, whatever it's gone through, which is an armed revolution, has to do is national dialogue and reconciliation, and disarmament of militias, and demobilization and reintegration, and security sector reform. All of these issues have to be done as part of a national programs and national projects. unfortunately, the GNC, I'm a member of the GNC. I'm having a communication problem and a mental block with the majority of the GNC members that don't understand the importance of these issues.
Abdelmonem, let me just ask you, Abdelmonem, let me just ask you something. I just caught on Twitter, it's a cartoon of your Prime Minister, and the first part says, if it doesn't fit, you've got to quit. And then it shows the Prime Minister wearing an oversized jacket. Are you one of the people calling for him to step down? He hasn't been in power for quite a year yet. Do you think his time is done?
Listen to me. Here's the one particular point. I have a very good personal relationship with this Prime Minister, personally, on a personal basis.
On a professional basis?
On a professional basis, no. I have actually worked with him from the beginning. I went with him when I saw the first draft of his budget. I found it to be disastrous because instead of coming with a budget that focuses on building the army and the police, I saw it funding militias.
So, Abdelmonem, do you feel that this is a personal feeling? Sorry to push you, but we have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to push you to be very direct. Do you think this is a personal failing of the Prime Minister?
Yes, it's a personal failing to be able to lead.
All right. So let me move back to Ayat, because Ayat, you have been documenting the revolution, and I really want to see it from your eyes and from people on the ground's eyes. As you're living through this turmoil, I know you're not in Libya right now, but you go backwards and forwards. What are the real life stories that help us understand what it's like to live through this transitional period of a revolution for Libya?
Daily lives of Libyans on the ground are very individual, where they only have themselves to look to if they should face any issues or any problems. You have the government and its affiliated militias or militias that are against it on the one hand, and that power struggle. And then you have the daily lives of the citizens on the other end of the spectrum.
That's the bit I care about, the daily lives. See, we heard stories about Libyans saying nobody drives properly anymore, everybody's crashing into each other. I didn't understand why having a dictator, not having a dictator, would suddenly make you drive badly. Can you explain that? When
you don't have a presence of law enforcement on the streets, you have people pushing those limits. And the problem with Libya is there are no limits, there are no boundaries. So everything has gone to the absolute extreme. People aren't driving correctly, young people are driving, people without licenses, people with cars that are not supposed to be on the roads. So that's just one example of how the country is kind of spinning out of control. They cannot drive, let alone any other sector of the society, unfortunately. And it is something that the government needs to begin addressing by securing the country. Once people feel they are secure, they are being watched, they have to be held accountable to something, and they have a government that is accountable to them, the equation starts to make sense.
See, but I've been listening to this conversation. Abdelmonem, he doesn't have bodyguards. The Prime Minister doesn't have bodyguards. How do you secure a country where even the GNC don't have security?
I think the government has unfortunately inherited problems of the former body of power that was taking care of Libya and the affairs after the revolution, that is the NTC, and then now the GNC. They have basically just inherited issues and not solved any issues.
Not one single issue has been solved?
I don't think so, and the government was very comfortable with militias early on, and they made that fatal mistake of playing house with them, that these militias would execute security assignments for them on their behalf and be paid.
Right.
That should have never taken place.
This is a very bleak picture. Let me just check back in with our community, see what they're saying.
It's bleak, but there is a little bit of optimism, shall we say. Hanan says the story...
You always look for optimism.
I try.
Yeah.
Hanan on Twitter says the story is not over, so it can't be judged yet. Let's call it a work in progress.
Okay. Wow. Abdelmonem, thank you for being part of the program. Jaballa, Thank you for being part of this program, Ayat, and also Mohamed as well. Well, this conversation will continue on Twitter and also on all of our media platforms. We've just given, I know, guests, that there's more conversation to be had. We've just given our audience some insight into the conversations, the complexity and the challenges that are happening around Libya right now. We've been talking for 45 minutes and there's still so much more to be done, as in Libya. Thank you very much for being part of this program. On the next show, accusations of racism and oppression in South Africa. This time, though, they're coming from white South Africans. We discuss the claims of a group called Red October and how South Africa is reacting to them. Until then, you'll find us online. Thanks for watching. Take care.